It was supposed to be a quiet evening. A dinner with friends, an evening in the apartment Emily shared with Jason. The smell of pasta sauce lingered in the air as she set the table for the two of them, the soft hum of a favorite playlist playing in the background. She had planned this night for weeks, eager to surprise Jason with a cozy, intimate evening after a long week. They had been engaged for 2 years, and although wedding planning was often stressful, there was still an undeniable excitement about the big day that was fast approaching. Emily had always imagined this part of her life as a dream. She had fallen in love with Jason in college, a classic romance. They met during a group project, laughed at the same stupid jokes, shared quiet moments in the library. It seemed to happen naturally, the way some things just align without you even realizing it. She loved him, and he loved her back. It felt like fate. But that evening, as she carefully plated the food and adjusted the wine glasses, everything came crashing down in a way she never could have anticipated. Jason was late. It wasn't unusual for him to get caught up with work, and Emily had long learned to be patient. She poured herself a glass of wine, sat on the couch and scrolled through her phone, occasionally glancing at the door. By the time it was almost an hour after their planned dinner, she felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Something felt off. He was never this late without a message. She sent a quick text asking if he was on his way, but there was no reply. Her phone buzzed just moments later, but when she looked at the screen, it was a message from her younger sister, Olivia. I need to talk to you about something. Can we meet? Emily stared at the message, her fingers hovering over the screen. She felt a wave of unease wash over her. It wasn't like Olivia to ask for a serious conversation out of nowhere. They were close, always had been. But Emily knew when something was off, and this felt off. Sure, Emily typed back. Is everything okay? Olivia's response came quickly. Can I come over? It's really important. By the time Olivia arrived, Emily was pacing in the living room, anxiety bubbling up inside her. What could be so urgent? Was Olivia upset about something? Had something happened with her work or personal life? When Olivia walked through the door, her face was pale. She didn't look like her usual confident self. In fact, she looked completely out of sorts, as though she had been carrying a heavy burden for some time. Olivia, what's going on? Emily asked, trying to read her sister's face. Is everything okay? Her sister looked around the room nervously, her eyes darting from one place to the next, avoiding Emily's gaze. Eminencia. I don't know how to say this, but it's about Jason. Emily's heart skipped a beat, a sharp pain piercing her chest. Her voice was barely a whisper when she asked, what about him? Olivia's hands trembled as she twisted her fingers in the fabric of her shirt. I've been seeing him, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. Emily froze. The room seemed to go still around her. For a moment, she thought she hadn't heard her sister correctly. Her mind struggled to process the words. She took a step back, her pulse hammering in her ears, and the wine glass she had been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. Olivia, she said, her voice cracking. What are you talking about? Are you telling me you've been? Her voice trailed off, as if the words she wanted to say couldn't even form in her mouth. How could this be happening? How could her sister, her own flesh and blood, betray her in such a profound way? They had been best friends, shared everything. She had confided in Olivia about Jason's quirks, their dreams for the future, their plans. And Olivia had been there, nodding along, offering advice, smiling through it all. I didn't want to hurt you, Olivia continued, her voice shaky. But I love him, I really do. And I didn't know how to tell you. Thought maybe it would go away. But it didn't. It just got harder to hide. Emily's stomach turned. She felt as though the ground beneath her had vanished. The world felt distant, like she was floating just above it, watching the scene unfold with detachment. Her sister had been seeing Jason. For how long? How could they have kept this secret from her for so long? You're lying, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. I swear I'm not, Olivia pleaded, stepping closer to Emily, her hands reaching out as if to touch her. But Emily recoiled. I'm so sorry, Em. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared at her sister, a sense of disbelief still lingering. How long, Olivia? How long has this been going on? Olivia's face crumpled with guilt. It's been a few months. It started after you two had that big argument about the wedding plans. Jason. He was there for me. I didn't mean to get attached, but I did. Just happened. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. She staggered backward, grabbing the edge of the table for support. You've been seeing him behind my back. How could you do this to me? He's my fiancé, Olivia. My fiancé. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she angrily wiped them away, furious with herself for letting her emotions betray her. I trusted you. I loved you. How could you? Olivia burst into tears, her hands covering her face as she sobbed. I never wanted to hurt you, Em. I swear. I'm so sorry. Emily could feel her entire world shattering in real time. She had spent years planning her life with Jason. They had talked about their future marriage, children, where they would live. And now, in a matter of moments, everything had been destroyed. Not by some external force, but by the two people she trusted most in the world. Is he here? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Is he outside? Olivia nodded, her face pale with shame. He knows you'll be upset. He didn't know how to tell you either. Emily stood in stunned silence. She couldn't even form coherent thoughts. Everything in her brain felt scrambled. She had trusted them both. And now they had destroyed the foundation of her life. Jason and Olivia together. I never thought you'd do this to me, Emily said, the words coming out harshly, as though they were the only thing she could control in that moment. You're my sister. I thought I knew you. I thought we were a team. Olivia took a hesitant step forward, but Emily held up her hand, stopping her. No, don't. I don't want to hear it. You've made your choice. You've chosen him over me. You've betrayed me in the worst possible way. And with that, Emily turned and walked out of the room, her heart shattered, her world crumbling around her. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed to leave. She needed to be away from the people who had hurt her so deeply. Her hands were shaking as she grabbed her coat and left the apartment, stepping into the cold night air, her mind racing, her chest tight with grief. She didn't know what the future held now, but one thing was clear. Her life was never going to be the same again. The night after Olivia's confession, Emily couldn't sleep. Her mind was a chaotic mess of rage, confusion, and deep hurt. She had stayed up for hours, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over in her head. How had it come to this? How could Olivia, her own sister, betray her like that? And how could Jason, the man she had shared her hopes and dreams with, become someone she no longer recognized? The pain was unbearable, but Emily knew she couldn't stay in that dark place forever. She had to do something. The idea that kept circling in her mind was simple, yet terrifying: revenge. She wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not without consequences. But Emily wasn't the type to lash out blindly. She wasn't interested in starting an all-out war or making a scene. What she truly wanted, was to make them understand the gravity of what they had done. She had to make them feel the weight of their betrayal, but without putting herself at risk. There had to be a way to do it from the inside. The next morning, she called her best friend Kate, who had known about her engagement to Jason for years, and had always been supportive. Kate was shocked and appalled by what had happened, but Emily didn't want her pity. What she needed now was clarity, and Kate knew her well enough to give her that. Do you think I should just walk away? Emily asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and hurt. I mean, I could just cut them both out of my life. Move on. But it doesn't feel like enough. I want them to feel it. Kate was silent for a moment. Emily could practically hear her friend thinking. You're asking if you should get revenge, Kate finally said, her voice calm. And honestly, I get it. You've been hurt. But what kind of revenge are you talking about? Emily's mind raced. She had already started to put the pieces together, even if she wasn't fully aware of the details. I don't want to destroy them. I don't want to stoop to their level. But they think they can just have everything, don't they? They think they can get away with this. That they can just move on and get married, while I'm supposed to smile and wish them well. So what's your plan? Kate asked, her voice steady, as if she knew this was where Emily was heading. I'm going to play the game, Emily said, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm going to get inside their little world, into their wedding plans. And I'm going to make sure everything falls apart, from the inside. Kate didn't say anything for a moment, letting the weight of Emily's words sink in. Then quietly she replied, "That sounds dangerous, Em. Are you sure this is what you want?" Emily hesitated, but then a wave of determination flooded over her. "I don't care anymore. I've been betrayed in the worst way possible. This is the only way I can even begin to make them understand the pain they've caused me." Kate sighed, but she didn't argue further. She knew Emily too well. Once she made up her mind, there was no changing it. Over the next few days, Emily began to put her plan into action. She knew that Olivia would want to start planning the wedding as soon as possible. After all, they had already set a date, and the excitement of being the center of attention was something Olivia had always craved. Jason, on the other hand, would likely go along with whatever Olivia wanted. He had always been the type to be swept up in her enthusiasm. Emily had no intention of confronting either of them directly. She knew that would only cause an explosive confrontation. Instead, she would work behind the scenes. She would insert herself into the wedding planning process, making herself indispensable while quietly manipulating the details to her advantage. It started with a simple phone call to Olivia. Emily had decided to play the role of the supportive sister, the one who would help Olivia plan the perfect wedding, despite the betrayal. She knew that Olivia would be eager to take her up on the offer, as it would make her feel as though Emily had forgiven her and was willing to move forward. "Hey, Olivia," Emily said, her voice calm but with an edge of feigned sweetness. "I know things have been complicated between us, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. I'll help you with the wedding. I want it to be everything you've dreamed of." Olivia's response was immediate and relieved. "Oh my God, Em, thank you. I really didn't know how to ask, but I was hoping you'd come around. I know I've hurt you, but I really want you to be a part of this." Emily hid the disdain she felt. "Of course. I'll help with whatever you need. Let's make it amazing." The words felt like poison on her tongue, but she held herself together. The plan was already in motion. Over the following days, Emily was more involved in the wedding planning than she had ever been in her own. Olivia was overjoyed by her willingness to pitch in, not realizing that Emily's kindness was laced with something far more sinister. She helped with the guest list, made recommendations for the florist, and even offered to research wedding venues, all while keeping up the pretense of a loving sister. At the same time, Emily carefully observed the dynamic between Olivia and Jason. They seemed so happy together, so in love, if you could call it that. But Emily could see through it. She could see the cracks in their relationship, the tension beneath the surface. Jason seemed distant, his eyes often clouded with guilt whenever Olivia wasn't looking. Emily could tell he was conflicted. He had made a mistake, but he wasn't willing to admit it. Olivia, on the other hand, was oblivious. She was caught up in the fantasy of her wedding, reveling in the attention, the excitement of being the center of everything. She didn't seem to care that Emily was a quiet presence in the background, manipulating the details for her own purposes. One evening, when Emily was over at Olivia's apartment to go through wedding invitations, she noticed something strange. Olivia had left her phone on the coffee table, and it buzzed constantly with messages. Emily glanced at it, her curiosity piqued. The name at the top of the screen made her heart stop. It was Jason. There were dozens of messages, some sweet, some apologetic, some urgent. It was clear that Jason was trying to reach Olivia. But what caught Emily's attention was a message sent just that afternoon. Olivia, I can't do this. I don't know if I'm making the right choice. I feel like I'm trapped. Please understand, I never wanted to hurt Emily. I'm not sure I can marry you. Emily's pulse quickened. Jason was having doubts. He was conflicted. This was her chance. She had been right all along. This wedding wasn't going to go off without a hitch. And now she had the leverage to make sure it fell apart. That night, Emily stayed up late, devising her next steps. She needed to get deeper into their world, to become indispensable so she could manipulate everything from the inside. But she had to be careful. Olivia couldn't suspect anything. She had to keep playing the part of the loving sister, the one who was there to help and support. It was the only way. The next morning, Emily called the wedding planner, a woman named Sarah, whom Olivia had hired. Sarah had been chosen for her professionalism, but Emily quickly discovered that she was easily manipulated. Emily subtly inserted herself into the conversations about the wedding details, making suggestions, recommending vendors, even offering to help with logistics. She played the role of the competent, capable sister, the one who was always willing to help. But all the while, Emily was quietly altering things. She shifted the seating arrangements, making sure that certain people would be seated together, people who didn't get along, who had unresolved issues. She subtly changed the menu, adding items that she knew would cause conflict among guests with dietary restrictions. She made sure the wedding cake had an odd flavor combination that would be divisive, knowing it would cause tension. And most importantly, she started to subtly shift the timing of the ceremony. If she could make the wedding run behind schedule, it would create the perfect amount of chaos. Emily wasn't doing this to ruin their lives permanently. She didn't want to destroy their marriage, but she wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions. She wanted Olivia and Jason to see the damage they had caused, to feel the weight of the betrayal they had inflicted on her. And she knew that the wedding would be the perfect opportunity for them to experience the fallout. The pieces were in place. Emily had successfully inserted herself into their lives, and now she was ready to watch everything fall apart. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about showing them the depth of their mistake. She would ruin their wedding, one carefully placed detail at a time. And by the time it was over, they would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The weeks leading up to the wedding felt like a blur for Emily. Every moment was meticulously planned, and as the wedding day drew nearer, the excitement in the air grew thick with anticipation. Olivia was practically glowing with enthusiasm. She'd barely noticed Emily's subtle changes, the little adjustments Emily had made in the details that no one else would likely notice. To Olivia, it seemed as though Emily had finally forgiven her and was fully on board with the wedding. She was constantly praising Emily's amazing contributions and calling her the best sister ever while they walked through the preparations. Emily played her part perfectly, wearing a smile and offering words of encouragement, all while knowing that behind every word and gesture was the truth she couldn't let Olivia see. Jason, on the other hand, seemed more distant than ever. He was still there physically, still involved in the plans, but Emily could tell that something was off. She had overheard snippets of conversations between him and Olivia, and while Olivia continued to be her bubbly, enthusiastic self, Jason seemed tired, distant, almost as if he was going through the motions. Every time Emily ran into him, there was an awkwardness in the air. He could barely meet her eyes. She knew he was struggling with the weight of the situation, but he had chosen his path, and now it was too late. On the outside, everything looked perfect. The wedding had been planned down to the smallest detail. Olivia had chosen a breathtaking venue, a sprawling mansion surrounded by gardens, a place that would make any wedding feel like a fairy tale. The invitations had been sent, the flowers arranged, and the catering confirmed. But Emily had made sure that everything was primed for a disaster. Every step of the way, she had placed the tiniest seeds of chaos that would eventually grow into a full-fledged storm. One of her first acts of sabotage had been the seating chart. Olivia had insisted on inviting every possible relative and friend, even those who didn't get along. Emily had subtly moved people around, making sure that certain guests, who had long-standing grudges, would end up seated next to each other. Some relatives who had always been dismissive of Olivia were now in the front row, while some of Jason's closest friends were seated far away from him. There would be tension in the air from the very first moment guests sat down. But that was only the beginning. Emily knew that once the wedding day arrived, it would be chaos. And she was right. The morning of the wedding, the air was thick with nerves. Emily had gone through the timeline of the day in her head 1,000 times, mentally checking each detail to ensure it would all fall into place. She had made sure the florist had delivered flowers in the wrong colors. They were supposed to be a soft blush pink and ivory, but Emily had ordered a deep red and dark purple combination, knowing it would clash terribly with the venue's decor. Olivia was already devastated when she saw the flowers. She was furious, but the florist had promised to fix the issue immediately, if only there was time. The flower shop was over an hour away, and by the time they arrived at the venue, It was clear that the entire floral arrangement would have to be rearranged in the middle of the ceremony. Emily was silently gleeful. But it wasn't just the flowers. The entire schedule had been subtly altered. The ceremony time had been changed, all thanks to Emily's quiet manipulation of the vendor schedule. She had made sure that the officiant's arrival time had been pushed back an hour, and that the makeup artists would be delayed. This simple act would ensure that the ceremony would start late, just late enough to cause a ripple effect of chaos through the day. As the guests began to arrive, Emily could already sense the tension in the air. People were confused by the changes in seating, wondering why some people were seated in the front row when they had no direct connection to the couple. There were whispers and questions, but no one could figure out what had gone wrong. Emily smiled to herself as she passed by, watching the discord grow. She made her way to the back of the venue where Jason was pacing nervously. He looked even more distressed than usual, his brow furrowed, his hands shaking. The closer Emily got, the more she could see the guilt in his eyes. She approached him, doing her best to mask her satisfaction. "Hey Jason," she said, her voice soft and casual. "You seem a little tense. Everything okay?" Jason didn't look at her at first. His gaze was on the floor, his fingers gripping the back of a chair as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. He finally met her eyes, and Emily could see the remorse in them. I'm so sorry about everything," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't know how things got so messed up. I've been trying to talk to Olivia. But you're not sure if it's the right choice, are you?" Emily interrupted, her tone deceptively gentle. "I can see it in your eyes. I know you're having doubts." Jason sighed, running a hand through his hair, clearly agitated. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. I love Olivia, but this whole thing, it's not as simple as it looks. I feel like I'm trapped." Emily watched him closely. It was almost satisfying to see him struggle, but she couldn't let her emotions get the better of her. She had a plan and she was going to follow through no matter what. "You made your choice, Jason," she said softly. "Now you have to live with it." Jason opened his mouth to say something, but the moment was interrupted by Olivia's high-pitched voice. She was rushing toward them, her face flushed with excitement, and with a hint of worry. "Jason, we're almost ready. Where have you been? We're starting late." And she stopped in her tracks when she saw Emily standing next to him, her eyes darting between them. "What's going on? Why are you two talking so seriously?" Emily stepped back slightly, playing the part of the supportive sister once more. "We were just catching up," she said with a smile. "Everything's fine, right, Jason?" Jason didn't respond immediately, but Olivia didn't seem to notice the tension. She grabbed Emily's arm eagerly. "Come on, I need your help with my dress. The bridal suite is a mess. Everything's late." As they walked toward the bridal suite, Emily couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. The stage was set, and there was no turning back now. She had done everything she could to ensure that the wedding was going to be a disaster. The little changes, each seemingly insignificant, were starting to have a compound effect, and Emily knew the chaos was just beginning. When they reached the suite, Olivia immediately began to stress about the flowers, which had yet to be fully rearranged. The florist had managed to swap out the worst of the colors, but the mismatched flowers still clashed with the rest of the decorations. Emily feigned concern, offering to help with any last-minute adjustments, while Olivia became increasingly agitated. And then it all began to unravel. The officiant, who had been delayed by over an hour due to Emily's previous adjustments, finally arrived just as the ceremony was supposed to begin. But his arrival only added to the stress. He was disoriented and unprepared, and the guests were starting to murmur, wondering what was going on. It wasn't long before people began to realize that the ceremony was running late, much later than anyone had anticipated. Olivia and Jason stood at the front of the venue, visibly uncomfortable, as the delayed start time only increased the pressure. But Emily had one last card to play. As the ceremony finally began, she made sure to discreetly inform a few of the guests about the true nature of Jason and Olivia's relationship. She knew the gossip would spread like wildfire, and it did. Whispers spread through the crowd, and soon, the guests weren't watching the ceremony. They were talking about the betrayal they had all been unknowingly a part of. As Olivia walked down the aisle, a hush fell over the crowd. But it wasn't the reverent silence of a wedding. Instead, it was a thick, uncomfortable quiet, punctuated only by the soft murmur of whispers. Olivia's smile faltered as she saw some of the guests exchanging uneasy glances. Jason, too, was visibly shaken, his face flushed with tension. The ceremony was a mess. The officiant fumbled through his script. The flowers looked out of place. And the guests were clearly distracted by the undercurrent of scandal. But Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This was only the beginning. Their perfect day had already begun to fall apart, and the fallout had just begun. Emily didn't know what would happen next, whether Olivia and Jason's marriage would survive this chaos, but she knew one thing. They would never forget what they had done to her. The night of the wedding was meant to be the culmination of everything. It was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of joy for Olivia and Jason, surrounded by friends and family, with promises of love and forever. Instead, as the evening wore on, the cracks in their perfect day began to deepen, and Emily felt herself teetering on the edge of something she couldn't yet define. The chaos she had worked so carefully to orchestrate was beginning to take on a life of its own, and what started as revenge now felt more like an unraveling, a force she couldn't control. The reception had begun with a clumsy toast, the best man, Jason's childhood friend, stumbling over his words. His speech, which was supposed to be heartwarming, instead felt uncomfortable and awkward, as if the weight of the secret hanging in the air was finally sinking in. Jason stood next to Olivia, his hand gripping hers tightly, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. Olivia, blissfully unaware of the full scope of what was happening, smiled at the guests with a forced cheerfulness, her face a mask that couldn't hide the tension in her body. Emily watched from across the room, a glass of wine in her hand, the bitterness of the evening mixing with the taste of the drink. It wasn't long before the whispers started again. Emily had planted the seeds, subtly informing a few guests about the truth of Jason and Olivia's relationship, and it spread quickly. It wasn't just the small, private conversations now. It was more than a few isolated murmurs in the crowd. The guests were openly discussing the rumors, questioning Olivia's relationship with her sister, wondering if Jason was truly committed to the marriage. Emily felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as she saw the guests growing uncomfortable, whispering to each other behind their hands. The foundation of the evening, the joy everyone was supposed to feel, was starting to crack. People were no longer paying attention to the wedding itself, but to the underlying drama that surrounded it. The food, which had been carefully chosen and planned out, was now the subject of quiet complaints. It wasn't terrible, but it wasn't what people had expected. Emily had switched the main course, ordering a dish that was difficult for some of the guests to eat, dishes that were either too exotic or simply unappealing to certain dietary needs. One of the older relatives began to complain loudly about the food, making a scene in front of others. Olivia, flustered and unsure, tried to smooth things over, but the discomfort in the air only grew. Emily watched the scene unfold, a sense of power rising in her chest. She had done this every little detail. The cake was another problem, baked with a flavor that most people hated. The rich, overly sweet combination of flavors caused half the guests to refuse it. The tension was now undeniable, and the wedding day was slipping through Olivia's fingers. The dancing portion of the evening was equally uncomfortable. Olivia had, as expected, chosen a slow romantic song for their first dance. But it was clear from the moment they took to the floor that Jason wasn't fully engaged. His body language was closed off. He barely made eye contact with Olivia, his gaze drifting toward the back of the room, where the guests were still murmuring, gossiping. It was as though he was already mentally checking out, and his bride seemed to sense it. Her smile wavered as she clung to him, trying to force the illusion of their happily ever after. Emily could see it. Jason was becoming overwhelmed. His face had taken on a pale, strained quality. Every so often, his eyes would flicker toward her. He knew. He knew exactly what she had done, and the guilt was eating away at him. And what hurt more than anything, Emily realized, was that Jason was too far gone to change. It was too late for him to go back to her. He had betrayed her, and now he was trapped in a situation he had created, one that he couldn't escape. But Olivia? She had no idea. She was still smiling, still floating on the fantasy of her perfect day, blissfully unaware of the truth. Emily felt a pang of something. Maybe sympathy, maybe just the dull ache of what could have been. But she buried it quickly. This wasn't about sympathy. It was about justice. And this was exactly what Olivia and Jason deserved. The evening went on, but Emily was starting to feel the weight of her own actions. As the night wore on, the cracks in their marriage became more and more visible. By the time the cake cutting came around, Olivia was visibly upset. Her smile, once so bright, had faded into a tired, forced version of itself. Her eyes darted around the room, unsure of where to look, as if searching for reassurance from the people who were supposed to be celebrating with her. Jason, for his part, had barely said a word. He stood there, his hands trembling as he held the knife to cut the cake. The wedding planner had tried to salvage what was left of the day, but it was clear that the damage had been done. The guests, no longer able to ignore the tension, were starting to leave in small groups, some even making excuses to cut the night short. The sound of quiet conversations, of people whispering about the truth of Jason and Olivia's troubled relationship, filled the air. The final blow came when, just after the cake was served, Olivia caught sight of a text on Jason's phone. Her face drained of color as she read the message, and Emily, from across the room, couldn't help but feel a sick sense of satisfaction at what came next. Olivia's voice trembled as she read aloud the words of the message. "Jason, I can't keep doing this. I can't marry you. I'm so sorry, but I'm in love with Emily. I never wanted to hurt you, but I can't live this lie anymore." The room went silent. Jason froze, his face going pale. Olivia looked around the room, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. The guests stared, unsure of what to make of the situation. "You what?" Olivia's voice was trembling as she tried to process the words. "What does this mean, Jason? How could you do this to me?" Jason looked back at her, a mixture of guilt and resignation filling his eyes. He stepped forward, but Olivia took a step back, as though the distance between them suddenly felt too vast to cross. "I'm sorry," he said, barely audible. "I never meant for it to happen like this. I don't even know how it got this far." The shock in Olivia's eyes was evident. She had no words, no reaction, just the raw pain of betrayal, standing in front of her guests, her future unraveling in front of her. Emily, for a brief moment, felt the weight of it all. The collapse of everything she had hoped for. The hurt she had caused. She had wanted this. She had wanted them to feel the pain of her betrayal. But now that it was unfolding in front of her, it didn't feel as sweet as she had imagined. She had no joy in their destruction, no real satisfaction in seeing them fall apart. She had wanted them to understand the consequences of their actions, to make them pay for their betrayal. But watching them, her heart sank. Olivia had been her sister, and Jason, as much as he had hurt her, had once been the love of her life. At that moment, Emily realized that no amount of revenge could undo the hurt. It wasn't about making them feel what she had felt. It was about her finding a way to move forward. The evening had become a sobering reflection of what betrayal truly was. The smiles, the laughter, the promises, they were all hollow now, lost in the wreckage of what had once seemed like a perfect life. Olivia, stunned and hurt, turned to face the room full of guests. Some were starting to leave, while others looked on with pity. Olivia's eyes locked on Emily's, and for a long moment, there was nothing but silence between them. And then in that silence Olivia spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to say anymore." And just like that, the facade of the perfect wedding crumbled. Olivia's perfect day, Jason's promise, and the lives they had built upon betrayal fell apart in front of everyone. It wasn't the revenge Emily had hoped for, but it was a fitting end to a love story that had never truly been real. As Emily turned to leave, the weight of the evening finally settling on her, she realized that, in the end, there were no winners. Revenge had cost her more than she had anticipated. But as she walked away, one thing was clear. She was no longer the woman who had been betrayed. She was the woman who had moved on. And that, in the end, was the real victory.